career as a banker. You've done a lot of business in Asia and China specifically, and you're also an advisor to President Trump. How would you advise the president in engaging China politically as well as economically?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is you actually engage each other and have an open dialogue and open conversation, which I gather they did when they met in the United States and to start to develop a relationship, which I think is important. China is a nation that's had an unparalleled growth in the last 20 years. It may not be quite that easy in the next 20. And America should applaud China growing and take its natural place in the global stage. And American business obviously has been here a long time. American interests have been here a long time. So we all would urge the president to be engaged, make sure to understand there are issues always on both sides. We believe in the strategic economic dialogue, and hopefully there'll be a good military dialogue so that it develops well. It's in both people's interests to develop well.
And you're also an advisor to President Trump. How would you advise the president in engaging China politically as well as economically?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is you actually engage each other and have an open dialogue and open conversation, which I gather they did when they met in the United States and to start to develop a relationship, which I think is important. China is a nation that's had an unparalleled growth in the last 20 years. It may not be quite that easy in the next 20. And America should applaud China growing and take its natural place in the global stage. And American business obviously has been here a long time. American interests have been here a long time. So we all would urge the president to be engaged, make sure to understand there are issues always on both sides. We believe in the strategic economic dialogue, and hopefully there'll be a good military dialogue so that it develops well. It's in both people's interests to develop well.
Right. But you also personally, obviously there are some, you see issues differently from the president. For example, you've been, as recently as 3 weeks ago, during your shareholders meeting, you were given an earful by investors and shareholders who were opposed to some of the stance and policies of the president. How do you, again, engage him in terms of these types of
So I think if business people were not going to engage with someone because they disagree with them a little bit, they wouldn't engage with anybody. I don't know anyone who agrees with everything that every president or every prime minister says. I think it's kind of, I feel, responsibility as an American to engage. I'm a patriot. I think America's a great country. I want to do better. I want to help the president do a better job. I always say that if you get an airplane, you better be rooting for that pilot. So I think the CEOs I know are pretty open. They tell him what they think. I think he's interested in knowing what they think. He's got some top professionals around him who do that too. So it's not just the president's team. I think the team is important. So we all have that dialogue. And that shows me, and people are talking about, you should do this and do that. I'm not going to, every time they disagree with something, make a public statement about it. I don't think that's my job.
Can we maybe look at a couple of issues, for example, in the economic relationships between the United States and China? Specifically, in your analysis, do you think China is a currency manipulator?
No. I've been very clear about that. In fact, the president at one point asked a bunch of people, and he was told by a lot that no, they're not. Or if they were manipulating, they're manipulating the currency up, not down. And I think my view is they're doing that to be responsible citizens in this part of the world more than anything else. Now, you could say that if you're going into the market and buying and selling currency, that's manipulating currency. Okay, well then maybe that's kind of true. But what they mean when they say that is they're manipulating it down to have favorable trade terms. So that the answer to that part's no. And so, some countries don't do it at all. And some people think it's completely wrong. It's not completely wrong for a developing nation. As nations develop capital markets and capital flows and they have different needs, most nations have done a little bit of that. At one point, they stopped doing it. When you have a fully convertible currency, and China says they strive to do that, they will probably no longer be acting in the foreign exchange markets. It'll just float freely and competitively like a lot of other nations do.
Next one is, in your analysis, do you think China is engaged in unfair trade practices of any sort?
Yeah, but I think they're fully aware of it. So fair trade, okay? So when the president says free and fair trade, well, of course we want free trade and fair trade. So he has pointed out certain issues that China, it hasn't been fair. Certain intellectual property issues, certain maybe cybersecurity issues, certain tariffs, certain WTO, certain inability of certain American companies to own 100% of something in the United States. Now, what made sense 15 years ago may not make sense today. It may not be as fair. And so I don't think the Chinese know that. I don't think that they deny that there are things. And in my view is the parties should sit down and talk about how to have better trade relationship. So it's not about tearing it up. It's not about yelling, screaming, pointing fingers. It's about having a real dialogue about what might have been fair yesterday may no longer be fair today. And so, some people talk about state-owned enterprise. So there are other things which might be legitimate, and they should be on the table.
So, for example, recently the Chinese regulator appeared to relax the ability for foreign banks such as yourselves to allow your locally incorporated subsidiaries to engage in investment banking. Would that be an example of such a opening up?
Exactly. So, but remember, that was supposed to be, I think, if I'm correct, supposed to be part of WTO 15 years ago. So part of free and fair trade meant that eventually it'd be free and fair trade. So generally, if you have U.S. dollars, you can do whatever you want with them. Okay. Now, of course, that's changed a little bit, and the Chinese companies will say, "Well, wait a second. America's been pretty tough on Chinese companies investing in America." And I think that's true. I think, and in some cases, unjustifiably true. And it wasn't a security issue or anything like that. It was, I forgot which example I had, but look, my view is, it's good for everybody that we have free and fair trade. We are I'm a free trader. I think that dialogue is how you get there. Now, Hank Paulson started years ago. It started way before that. I do believe that you're going to see that happen with the Trump administration and the Xi administration, that they're going to talk. In fact, Wilbur Ross, I don't know if you made a big deal of it here, but came out recently and said, here's 10 things that we've agreed to do differently. Well, that's the beginning. One, if it's hurt their livelihood that much. And I think that's going to be true for China too, by the way.
So what will JP Morgan do, given that the industry for financial services is opening up and you are able to? One
day, I want to be able to own 100% and do anything in China, not 49%. I honestly believe that 49% has a structural problem. It leads to bad governance. It leads to underinvestment. China, one of the things China talks about, and they talk about it, is market reform. And if you think about state-owned enterprises, inefficiency, corruption, market reform, they're all related. And so hopefully one day JP Morgan can play an important part in helping improve standards and underwriting and credit and disclosures and governance of companies, and we want to do it the way we do it everywhere. We're quite good at it, and not that we don't make any mistakes, but we think it's important to be able to do that. Just like I think the Chinese banks are going to do that in the United States. And they are going to. In fact, they are doing it already. So,
in your analysis, is China considered a market economy?
There's obviously a huge market economy in China, so it's getting there. It's on its path. So.
You also wrote in your.
I think China's done an unbelievable job, in the last 20 years. I think it's been good for the world. Their growth, and I don't think it's easy. I don't think that you can take politicians around the world and they necessarily would have done a good job at it. So, as you go on that path, of course there are going to be issues and problems. There's no nation ever that's gone from this level of development, like an emerging market, to develop that didn't have that. And that's led to reforms and problems, and markets have problems, and markets aren't perfect. So all those things have to be managed well.
You mentioned that anti-globalization sentiment could be a major risk to your business,
yeah.
JP Morgan's business. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I said it that way. I think globalization, trade, and technology have been some of the best things that ever happened to mankind. That there is a lot of anti-globalization sentiment. I was simply acknowledging that is there, sometimes for good reason, because if one of the problems with globalization and trade is that everyone benefits in a country a little bit, but the people get hurt a lot, and they don't necessarily get a livelihood back. And that we should have done a better job, I'm talking about we in general, business and governments, in acknowledging that and doing something about it. That's what we should have done. And so I don't think you're going to have deglobalization. I think that's just is a fiction. But you could have in certain parts of the world, in certain industries, and I think it would be a mistake. And so I just think we could have done a better job for that. And you're going to have those